right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to this month's Steno Royalty Q&A. We have with us Anthony. I should have asked you how to pronounce your name.
Frisolone.
Frisolone, okay. And he is a reporter. He's been reporting for about 25 years. Right now with he's an official in the U.S. District Court in New York. He's done some freelance work, some art work. He's also been an official in the New York State Supreme Court. He gives back to his profession by writing articles, by speaking, by serving as the president of the New York State Court Reporter Association, serving on committees. He presents seminars, he does trainings, all around Steno Royalty in my mind. And I welcome Anthony to our Q&A session. So tell us a little bit, Anthony, how you came to find court reporting and actually just start being interested in it.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Laura. I really appreciate you considering me Steno Royalty. Like I always tell people, I'm just a humble court stenographer from Brooklyn, but apparently I'm a little bit more than that to people. But so it's humbling and it's kind of it's a nice little boost to the self-esteem. But my personal story, I was in junior in high school, and I was thinking about things to do after high school, and I did a lot. I was involved in a lot of clubs, and more specifically, I was president of my Amnesty International chapter in high school, and so I enjoyed being in front of people and kind of imparting what I knew about certain subjects. And I always loved giving presentations and things like that. And so I thought, like, maybe I could, become a teacher. And so I really thought about, what subject that I want to teach eventually. And I kept going back to my love of history and social studies and current events, things like that. So I had my heart being set on a teacher until one day I was at a family gathering, and one of my uncles, my mom's brother, Tom, said, I know you want to become a teacher, and that's great, but you have to understand the downsides to it too. And so that's when I started talking to my Aunt Teresa, and she was a New York City public school teacher, and then actually worked her way through the ranks of becoming an assistant principal at a New York City high school. And I kind of follow her around and what it was like and what teachers really have to do, like sort of the behind the scenes. It's not just standing up in front of school students and teaching. It's also how to manage a class and things like that. And at the time in my life in high school, I was very quiet. So it was kind of in certain situations. I wouldn't say all situations, because obviously I'm comfortable in front of people, but then it was, how to manage a classroom and and actually tell kids what to do. It was kind of not in my comfort zone. So then my Uncle Tom, kind of going back to him, he was a court clerk. He was actually a supervising court clerk in criminal court in Manhattan. He said, why don't you come to the courthouse and see what kind of careers you might be interested in there? So went down to the courthouse in Center Street, which is in Lower Manhattan, and went around with him, spent the day with him, looking at different court officers and court clerks and what they did. And then I met the court reporters, and they the way they spoke about it. And at the time, and I still play a musical instrument, I play the drums, and so when they started talking to me about theory and speed building and reading notes and things like that, I really started to feel like, wow, this is like a musical instrument to me. And so they told me what school to go to, and there was literally, the school I attended was 2 blocks away from the courthouse. So they said, go to Stenotype Academy on Broadway and get all the information you can. So that afternoon I went over there and I got brochures and I read about it. And obviously my parents were interested in what I wanted to do at high school, after high school. My dad worked for the New York City Department of Highways, and my mom, prior to getting married to my dad, she worked for the FBI in the New York field office, and then got married, got out of the job market, to raise my brother and I. And then she was coming back into the job market just as about midway through high school. So she was really interested in like what I was going to do, because she didn't want to see, even though my dad's job was great, civil service is a great job. She wanted, I think, a little bit more from my brother and I. So she kept saying, well, what about college? What about, a job that's going to put food on the table for you and your family, and, eventually. And when I came home and I was telling them about this, they were like, oh, wow. They kept calling it a court stenographer, because I guess it was a generational thing with them. And I said, yeah. And then I started telling them about it, and they were like, well, that sounds like a good job, And I told them how to go about it. And I think even like over that summer between junior and senior year of high school, I went to an open house with my dad. And, my dad was like, this is fantastic. Oh, yeah, there goes a picture of me and Rich Jermosin. He's another Steno royalty that you should talk to. He's great. He's competed in the speed championship 3 times now. Anyway, I finally, like in senior year, I applied to the school. I took like a placement exam, and I graduated. Well, I graduated high school in 1991 in June, and September 23rd of 91, I started my first day of call reporting school. And it took me 2.5 years to graduate. It has its ups and downs. I mean, look, I always tell people, the call reporting school is a string of failures peppered with successes. You just have to hang in there, because it's not easy. That's why there's so few of us. If this was an easy job or an easy profession to get into, everybody would be a call reporter. It's almost like equivalent to becoming, an elite athlete. Everybody wants to be a football, pro football player, pro baseball player, whatever. But a very small percentage get there. And even then, once they get there, it's an even smaller percentage that actually stick around and actually have a long career. Like I'll give you an example. My theory class, there was actually 2. So we started out with 60 students, September 91. In my class alone, the 30, by the end of the first month, we lost 2. By the time we finished that semester of theory, I think we were down to like something like 20. So we lost, 11, 12 people that first semester of theory. Fast forward to graduation, I think there were like 6 of us out of that original 60 that were left.
Let me ask you, to what do you attribute the fact that you stuck with it and finished in a relatively short period of time?
What do I attribute to it? I think, discipline to a large extent. I really credit going to, I went to a private, parochial high school, that you were expected to meet certain benchmarks, and the teachers didn't take like, oh, you forgot your homework, that's okay. You forgot your homework, there were consequences. We had to wear uniforms every day. So like, there were just certain things that groomed me from when I was very, 14, even before that. But, from when I really was a young man to when I graduated high school, that really set me up to go into a field of study like this, because call reporting is about discipline. It's about being able to sit in the chair for long hours, focus, concentrate, have the work done when it's requested. The other thing, my musical background, again, more discipline, more about like, and I always call steno music in reverse, because like when you play music, you play an instrument, you create notes, and then you make the music. Whereas I'm taking in words and then creating the notes as a call reporter. So it's sort of that, but it's the ability to take one language and process it and turn it into another, and then really the last thing was, I've always been an avid reader. I always, like when there was a standardized exam that like the New York State or whatever would give you, I always placed very high in like the English and the read. And like I always joke, like my math scores were always like, I was always like 65, 70 in math. And I always tell people, that's why I'm a core reporter and not an accountant, because I'm better with language and reading and things like that versus, my arithmetic skills.
Yes.
So I think that's what kind of helps you. And also too, like looking back at the theory that we were taught, it was much simpler to learn and to really, apply. I think theories, over the last, 25, 30 years, especially with real time, I think have really complicated matters. I think they expect students to come out of school too perfect, and it slows things down. I think the more you have to think, it slows down your writing. That's why I tell students, just stick with your theory. Don't get bogged down with learning too many brief forms. That'll come. Believe me, I'm still learning brief forms, but I would say the first 5, 10 years, I wrote a lot out. I mean, when I think about it, when I look at I have all my old tests, and sometimes I'll look back at them and I'll say, wow, I really wrote a lot of stuff out. Even at the high speeds, I wrote a lot out. And it was really only when I was going for like the registered merit reporter exam, the certified real-time reporter exam, that I started to shorten my writing up. One, for the merit, it's 260 words a minute on the Q&A, as most of you might know. You've got to have short writing. You just have to. I know very few long writers that actually, get past that exam successfully. I kind of got it the first few times I took that Q&A and said, hold on, I got to fix this. So that's when I started shortening my writing. Then for the real-time exam, again, short writing saved the day, because when you start listening to actually what's being said, you can phrase more and you start developing certain phrases in your writing that will just help you stay ahead of the speaker to kind of adjust for maybe a misstroke that you catch. And you can delete it out really quick and then rewrite, whatever was said to kind of help you pass the exam. So that's, I hope I answered the question, but that's pretty much how it's what I feel.
Yes. How did you get over obstacles in school? All students, me included, way back, we got stuck at speeds. We have these obstacles. How did you get past any obstacles in school?
I mean, probably, well, again, we all stuck together. I guess I was fortunate that the group of people that we started school together, we all kind of hung in there, and supported each other. I still have, my best friend is, we work in different courts and we see each other, occasionally, but we always pick up the phone. And him and I stuck through school the whole time. And a support system helps. It's unfortunate, though, that unless you've got a core reporter in your family's really not going to understand what you're going through. So the only people you can really fall back on are your fellow students, and really, support each other. It's not a competition, believe me. I see that, and it was always doomed for failure. The only competition is yourself. And so the best thing to do is make friends with everybody in your class or online if you're in an online school, and support each other, encourage each other to get you through the rough times. I look at different things like Navy SEAL training and things like that. None of those guys are in competition with each other. They're all working towards the same goal. They all want to become Navy SEALs, And so, why compete when the goal for everybody and the prize is the same? So you're just better off supporting everybody and, supporting each other and lifting each other up. And then the other thing too is just, consistent practice. Consistent practice, analyzing what's going on, asking your teachers, well, what did I do here? Because even as good as I thought I was in English, I still needed to be better. And so like when I would look at my transcripts in school, because my school, they would actually make us mark the exams ourselves with the teacher's supervision. And we would start to see our mistakes, which I thought was really beneficial. And so then I would ask my teachers, well, how do I improve this? Why did I not punctuate this correctly? And then they would try to, point me to like the specific rule of English. Like we used Morson's English Guide. This is before Margie Wakeman Wells came on the scene. And, or actually before she started writing her books. But so Lillian Morrison, at least in New York, was, kind of the queen of core reporting punctuation. So we would sit with that book, look at our old tests, and kind of figure out what we did wrong to not do it again, and so that's what kind of helped me, also too, at least one day a week, usually a weekend, just put the machine down and just do something else. Luckily I worked a part-time job, so I had work to kind of divert me once in a while and keep my mind off of myself. And actually did it. Actually went to school. I was kind of fresh again.
Sorry, hold on one second, because I muted you by mistake. Sorry. All right, now I've unmuted you. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Let me ask you now to tell us about your experiences as an official. You've been an official most of your career.
Right.
Tell us what that's like, and then we'll start hearing about some of your interesting high-profile cases.
Okay. I guess again, it's a lot of it's personality driven. I'm someone that I like people. I'm a friendly, outgoing person. I'm not comfortable being by myself a lot of times. When I go, sometimes I'll give you a quick example. Sometimes, I'll have to go to the mall for something. And I feel weird with not having like my wife or my kids with me, because that's something we always do. And so like when we go back in time to when Anthony was in court reporting school, it was kind of weird to just like meet a court reporter like on the street and go to a deposition and then we'd part ways, and that was really it, unless that reporter wanted to sit and talk to me for a little bit, When I did my internship in New York City Civil Court, I met all the reporters. They had like a lunch table that in the morning before everybody went to court, all sat down and had coffee and talked and, traded ideas and just talked about whatever, and I kind of liked that. It was like a family atmosphere, quote unquote family. And you can see how everybody got along and really, just had a good time. And when you do that for a month, you kind of get sold on like, hey, being an official, not such a bad gig. You go to the same place every day, you get a paycheck every 2 weeks, you work with great judges and attorneys and stuff like that. And so like, why would you not want to work? Oh yeah, there goes me talking to some students. So that's what kind of sold me on being an official. Now I did freelance. So the first 10 months of my career, I freelanced. I worked for 2 freelance firms here in New York City. And then during that time, I was going for the RPR exam, and I ran into one of my classmates, and she said, oh, you have to go to the New York Workers' Compensation Board. That's the place to go to. And I'm like, well, why? And she's like, well, again, you work in the same place every day. And, there's, she said, and, we kind of talked about some other things. And then she said, the other thing is you take medical testimony all day. And I'm like, really? And she's like, yeah, it's doctors and, all different specialties and stuff like that. And she said, that's really good training for like when you want to go to like state Supreme Court and stuff like that. So I said, wow, I got to go to this place, workers' comp. So she gave me some information. I sent my resume in, and like late September, give or take, I got a call from the chief reporter, Bill. And he said, look, we're having a test in a couple of weeks. Are you interested in taking the test? And I said, sure. And this is a time, and it's still like a kind of a practice here in New York. Certain agencies, like the grand jury, will give like in-house exams when they need reporters quickly. So like at the time, there was a bit of a shortage because the New York State courts hired and they need to get people quickly back to fill those positions. And so what they do is they hold these things called, they're called provisional appointments. So, anyway, the provisional appointments are just, they're kind of temporary, but not. Basically, you have to pass the permanent civil service exam in New York, because that's how everybody gets into the courts or these state agency positions. And so I took it, I passed, and I started on Halloween of 1994, October 31st. And so I was, a New York State employee. I got a paycheck. It was great. And then during that time, I was a workers' comp. I had to pass the permanent exam, which I did. And then the other civil service opportunities showed up, which, like, for lower court, which in New York State, it's civil, criminal, and family court. Civil court, it's, lawsuits under $25,000. Family court is custody and abuse cases, juvenile delinquent, like juvenile felons, and then criminal court are like your misdemeanor cases, and so what you do is you take one exam and you might get called for one of those three courts. So I took the exam. I didn't do well on it, I'll be honest with you. I didn't put the time necessary into preparing, but I passed, bottom line. And so I waited a while, and actually it was good that I did, because while I was a workers' comp, it was a great job. It's not like a high pressure court or anything like that. So on my off hours, if it wasn't like a transcript to do, I would practice. So while I was there, I practiced and I passed the RPR. I think I passed the first two legs of the merit, the first leg of the merit and the written. So kind of got that out of the way. And while I was there, I started sharpening my real-time skills, my general computer knowledge, because, again, it's not a high-pressure court, a busy court. So I was able to do all these things. So I was really fortunate for getting that job when I did. Then in 1998, I got a call to go to family court, which I was kind of like, oh, I don't want to go to family court. But actually wound up being sometimes like what you want isn't always what the universe wants for you, I guess, to put it in those terms. Because going to family court, there's actually a lot of speakers in family court. And I'll give you an example. You could have a case where there's two children involved. And so what will happen is you'll have a lawyer for the mother, a lawyer for the father, a lawyer for the kids, okay, and they're called a guardian ad litem. Then you'll have, obviously, and in New York, the prosecuting agency in family court, that's the Administration for Children's Services. They actually have a legal division where they have, like, quote unquote, like prosecutors. They're not called that. I forget what they're called, Assistant Corporation Counsel. And so, you would have custody and abuse trials. It was some grisly stuff. The first month, there, I started in February 98. The first month there was just like, I can't believe I'm hearing this stuff. Again, not really being exposed to that side of life. It was a big eye opener at whatever I was, 98. I was, 23, 24. So it was an eye opener. Then in July 98, I got called for the New York State Supreme Court. So like in a very short period of time, I went from the lower court into Supreme Court, but that was because I took tests for those two courts. Got assigned to my home county, which at the time was Bronx County. So I was 20 minutes from the courthouse. I was in Supreme Court. This was great. I was on top of the world. And, the Bronx, like any county in New York City, which, there's 5 boroughs and there's 5 counties in New York City, and they're basically the same thing. It's just a governmental distinction. But, there's Bronx, Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island. And so they're busy, with the population we have. There's all sorts of crime going on. And it was, I remember the first case I was on, I picked the jury in a murder trial, and I had all sorts of other stuff. I did very little civil litigation when I was in the Bronx. It was mostly criminal, but it was good because I'd never really done that sort of stuff. Workers' comp is basically civil court, civil stuff. Family court's like a civil proceeding in a way. It's not really criminal. And So this was my first taste. I learned how to pick juries. I learned, what different types of evidentiary proceedings were. It was just a great education. And again, people I had gone to school with who had gotten there before I did, it made the transition smoother because now it's friendly faces. There were a lot of people who I had only heard their names and then kind of, got to know them and they got to like mentor me. Again, just something to remember, you'll always have mentors at different stages in your career. You won't always have just one, you might have several. And so it just depends on where you are in your career, and it may change, So then I went to the Bronx County. I was getting married the next year, so that was 1999, and I actually got a transfer down to Kings County, which is Brooklyn. And I was actually in Brooklyn for 6 years. So from 98 to 04, I went to Brooklyn. And things changed in late 2003. There was a change in leadership. I was kind of getting a little unhappy with the job. And I think, again, it's all about how it flows from the top down. And so I love the work. I love going to court, and I love the cases. And at that time I was doing, felonies and medical malpractice cases, matrimonial. It wasn't like the work was boring me. Far from it. It was just the leadership was getting on my nerves. And I remember one day I walked into the chief reporter's office, and her deputy was sitting there who I had known. And I just said, how do I get out of here? And she looked at me. She's like, what do you mean? And I go, look, I am just super unhappy. And believe me, as much as I love this job, once in a while you do have these crises that you have to deal with. And so we sat, we talked about it, and, I kind of expressed where I wanted to go. And again, working, going to school in Lower Manhattan and walking through, from the train station that I would take, I walked past, the state Supreme Court, and then I walked past, the federal courthouse. And those to me were always like icons in my mind of like what courthouses should look like and where court reporters would want to work, would want to aspire to. And I was never like one to just sit back and accept second best. Yeah, that's 60 Center Street. That's actually, if you look to the right, my right, that's 40 Center Street. That's the federal courthouse. You can probably look it up online. You can just Google it. But those courthouses are just, they're gorgeous. The pictures don't even do them justice. Matter of fact, the Rotunda, they have an art exhibit all year round. They have like a rotating art exhibit, and they have different competitions and stuff, and they display the work there. It's an amazing building. Anyway, she said, well, my husband works in the Eastern District of New York, which is where I work now. And I said, do you mind if I talk to him? And just kind of get the idea of what this job's all like, what that job's all about. And again, I'm leaving, a coveted, I was contemplating leaving at the time, a coveted state civil service position to go off into the unknown of federal civil service. So, and it was kind of like, well, I want to go with my eyes wide open, And so I got me in touch with him. I actually walked up the street, had lunch with the guy, and kind of laid it all out for me. And then this was a guy who, at that time he had, probably close to, 35, 40 years of experience on the job. So he had seen a lot and been through a lot with court reporting. And so, we sat, talked for a couple of hours, talked, after that. And then one day he calls me and goes, hey, Ant, he goes, we're getting 2 new judges. We're going to need reporters. I said, great. He said, well, you're going to put your resume in? And I said, well, why not? I'll give it a shot. So it was kind of like a weird time because in 2004, I had just become president of the New York State Court Reporters Association. So I was kind of working my way through, being president, now being the leader. I had a 1-year-old baby, and now I'm contemplating a job change. So it was kind of like tons of stuff going on. But, again, job changes, and I'm sure many of you maybe out in the audience have gone through this. And communication with, your spouse, your significant other, that's always important. My wife knew what I was going through, and she was like, listen, she's like, go for it. like it can only help you. It should help me. I never even realized, going into it, I was just looking to get away from a situation that was making me unhappy. So I applied for the job. I got the resume. I got the interview, and a few weeks later, I got a call and say I was hired. Again, getting officialship in federal court isn't like the New York State Supreme Court. At the time there was a 1-to-1 ratio, so it was one judge for one reporter, and so there's no excess. We don't have extra reporters waiting around to cover courtrooms. It's, whereas there's 18 judges in Brooklyn, there's 18 court reporters. Actually right now we're at a 2-person deficit because we've had like retirements and things like that, and we're waiting for the positions to be filled. So anyway, started December 4th, 2004. My first week, it was a bank robbery trial I took. There were some bumps the first year. I walked into one case. It was like a Chinese passport fraud, and every name just sounded the same, and it was a nightmare. I kind of walked in thinking like, hey, I just did all this time in Supreme Court. I'm pretty good at what I do, and not so. From being to my abilities with my software, it was just a disaster, and then I got my head handed to me on a terrorism trial. It was, wasn't really, it was terrorism. I mean, basically the guys were running a money laundering operation out of an ice cream parlor in Brooklyn and funneling the money to Germany, and from Germany funneling it to the Middle East to support like Hamas and Hezbollah and stuff like that. Which, I mean, from a current events point of view, I was on point because of my reading and just staying on top of that stuff. But then the writing had to catch up, and it was tough. And I really started sitting thinking to myself, like, what am I doing here? Like, I am like not cut out for this. And I'm looking at my colleagues and going, there goes El Chapo. They're an amazing group. But a couple of them sat me down. They're like, listen, we all go through this. This is just a learning curve. It's been a few years since you've gone through a learning curve. Hang in there. And so I said, all right, I'll listen to you guys. And I just kind of sat, developed a plan as to how I was going to accomplish surviving federal court. And, it was all right. Every morning I'm going to sit and practice. I'm going to really review my transcripts, see, again, go back to the basics, proofread on paper, use a red pen, ask questions. So many times I would just sit and talk to like the court clerks and ask them about different terminology, or talk to my colleagues and ask them about different terminology. And obviously they would give me how to write it, and the court clerks would give me like, well, what it all means. And so like once I understood what it all meant, I was able to write it better. So, and again, that's why I like coming to court, because you have this team aspect that you can draw upon these different resources. So got through my first year, got through my second, we had again, a busy place. Then the financial crisis happened in 2008, and it slowed down. Like, we went from having a really busy spring to basically sitting around the balance of the year. And now I'm going, wow, what are we doing here? This is scary. So that's when a friend of mine suggested that I become a trainer for stenograph. And I figured, why not? I was an instructor at a court reporting school, and I was an adjunct. So I would just come in and fill in when other instructors couldn't make it. So that was kind of fun. And and of course, giving seminars as, previous to that, and being the president of the Court Reporters Association, I was like, well, sure. This will just add another element to who I am as a professional. So I spoke to my local sales rep here in New York, and he was like, you'd be great. I know your reputation. I think you would be really cut out for it. So then I contacted the training program manager at Stenograph, and she said, sure. She said, here's the steps. We're having a big training in New York. You have to attend a 2-day training. There's projects you'll have to do, things like that. And so basically I did all that. So that was September. By November, I was in the training program, and I was on my way to training court reporters. And, you start out like stenographers careful. I mean, they always are. their new trainers only got like basically new customers to train, where you're only teaching them the basics. And so you do a bunch of those trainings, and then you kind of move up. And again, your reputation builds too. And so the people that you've trained now are talking to their colleagues, and it kind of expands. And then it's on you to kind of expand your skill set and your ability, because, contrary to popular belief, trainers don't know it all. And there's plenty of times where I'm reading manuals about something in case catalyst, again, in reporting, I don't do certain things that other reporters do. Like there's these things called timers. In court, I've never used a timer, whereas people out in freelance use them all the time. So I had to learn that. And there were other skills, how to develop different types of automatic indexing templates and keyword indexes and things like that. So that helped me build my skills as a trainer. And, since then I've half a dozen state associations, I mean, 200-300 hours a year at least of training. I mean, it adds up, but it's fun because it keeps me out there meeting different types of officials from different states, communicating via Facebook and social media, or sometimes people just get my phone number and call me, and we start talking. So that's fun. Then yeah, Laura,
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask you, do you think that this diversifying you're doing with your skill, et cetera, has what's kept you fresh, your love of court reporting fresh?
Oh, without a doubt. Because by diversification, you always have to expand your skill set, and, you can apply that to the job, which makes doing the job easier, for you. You can also then pass on that information to your colleagues, which makes for a stronger team here in the courthouse. And that makes us better and makes us look good. I mean, I dare say that, the high profile work we've had recently, with like El Chapo and Martin Shkreli and the different terrorism cases and things like that, the last 5 years have been at times really, really busy. And we have a team now that I think is second to none in the country. When you think about the level of experience we have, and what we each bring to the table, and I'd like to think that, as given my diversification, has helped make us better. I mean, you go from like the top, our oldest reporter, he's got close to 50 years on the job, to, some reporters who have, 15 years on the job, our newest reporters. So
can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to work on these high profile cases? I'm sure there's a lot of media. There's a lot of, you have, transporting these people back and forth, and what is all that like as a reporter when you're in the courtroom?
Well, in the courtroom, you're probably, I'll focus on El Chapo. So El Chapo's reputation precedes him. In the courtroom, you're probably in the safest place in Brooklyn. You've got, the United States Marshal Service, and again, some of them have weapons on them, some of them don't. Depends what their role is. They're transporting the prisoner, they don't have weapons on. If they're in court security, they have weapons on. There were weapons outside the courtroom. There were armored vehicles in New York City Police Department, vehicles and police officers ringing the courthouse. We had facial recognition equipment, all sorts of stuff, to going on. So you were pretty safe in the courthouse. I never felt like, oh my gosh, I'm in jeopardy here. This guy's going to hunt me down. Never, not even like once. The court security took great pains to make sure everybody, public, employees, the judges, were all safe. Again, it just becomes sort of like the first few weeks or the first couple of appearances, it's like, wow, this is like a big deal, from a reporter point of view. But then after a while, you know the faces, you know the names that might pop up, things like that. And it kind of becomes like, after a while, not such a big deal after a while, believe it or not. By the time it went to trial, we knew who the attorneys were. We were used to working with them. We had a great rapport with them. You know, they knew what to expect with us and our work product. And so we go to trial, and then it was just a smooth 11 weeks, you know. Again, there's a lot of management because we do rotate week to week through the case. So when it was my week, you know, I had to line up who was available, work with everyone's court schedule to kind of get coverage, because the way we work, you know, my court, we do a lot of daily and immediate copy. So one reporter can't do that. You know, I mean, I don't care who you are. You need some backup. You need some type of support system. So the support system here is our own staff. And we'll, like, give you an example. 9:30 court starts. I'll go in from 9:30 to 10:30. Then one of my colleagues will come and relieve me from 10:30 to 11:30. Then we might have a break there. And then so from, like, say, quarter to 12 to 12:30, 12:45, another reporter comes in. By the time it comes back to me, I'm already done with my first take. And then I go in for, like, maybe a few more minutes till the lunch hour. Maybe there's a witness they're trying to finish up, so it runs overtime a little bit. I catch that little piece of testimony. Excuse me. And, you know, then in the afternoon, we just kind of start over again. And the reporter that was supposed to come in after me goes in first. And we kind of rotated that way until the end of the court day. And luckily, the judge we worked with on the case, Judge Hogan, he ended court every afternoon at 4:30 because he had civil conferences to do in his chambers. So guaranteed 4:30, 5 o'clock, the latest, you were done. And then we just had to get the transcript done. We put it together, distribute it to the parties, maybe print out a hard copy for the judge. And then that was it. And then, of course, like, the media catches on, like, oh, wow, they're getting transcripts every day. So then you would start getting phone calls from, you know, whether it was Univision or Telemundo or a European news organization, or even, like, here in New York, you know, New York Post, the Daily News, the Times. You know, we would get calls from those reporters, the newspaper reporters, for copies of the transcript or excerpts. And so it was, you know, managing that. And it was like, well, whose testimony do you need? And then we'd have to block that out, get a separate transcript for them, bill them out. So, you know, really the reporting was easy after a while because you knew the terms, and the attorneys were great. You know, they handed us a glossary, you know, well in advance of the trial. The judge got real time, they got real time. So they wanted to make sure everything was readable, obviously. And then as the time went on, if we had questions about different names or the way something was pronounced, they would work with us. We worked with a really, just real quick to divert from Teresa Custer, would I consider going back to state court? Not now. If it was that first or second year and the opportunity showed up, maybe I would have went back, but not at this point. And do I consider it a step down? No. My state colleagues work really hard. I think at times they work harder than me on a daily basis, you know, because of the volume of the New York State court system. You know, back when I was in the state court, there was a statistic quoted that the New York State court system, the entire New York State court system, not just the 5 boroughs, handled more cases in a year than the entire federal court system. So think about that. The federal court system stretches from as far west as Guam to as far south as the U.S. Virgin Islands to as far north as Alaska. And we still don't have the caseload that the New York State court system has. So I wouldn't consider it a step down. I would consider it maybe having to work a lot harder than I am now. Again, working hard, I equate as working all day in court without a break versus maybe, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 11 weeks of maybe really hard testimony and stuff like that, and then having a lull, and then maybe the next case comes along. So
I'm just going to jump in here and ask, does anybody else have any questions? I've been fascinated by this whole story, by your whole journey, Anthony. Does anybody else have any questions you'd like to ask of Anthony?
Yeah, no, I'm kind of like rambling on here.
And yeah, but it's been really great. I'm just really, most of my career was as a freelance reporter, even though
Right.
my grandfather was a judge in state court. So I kind of grew up in a courtroom, but it's been fascinating to hear all of this different kinds of courts you've been in, and the cases you've done, and how you've nurtured your career so that your skill, so that you never get burned out, let's say, or if you start to, taking steps to not be burnt out. So this is all great information you're sharing here.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? I want to ask you just what advice you would give any students or new reporters who might be listening to avoid burnout.
Always keep in touch with the profession, whether it's through social media, through like real live one-on-one interaction, trade, to kind of talk things out, trade ideas, learn about new opportunities. Don't be afraid to go to seminars. People are kind of down on that, about, whether it's the travel or spending money, or, but go to them. I mean, that was, until very recently, Jackie, I am still a trainer, but until very recently, with my family life getting busy, with my kids, I would go to seminars, I would travel. I mean, I've been to a few like national conventions, my own state, other states, and they're great. They're great to meet other reporters, and then sometimes the speaker up at the podium, it was me. It was me talking to other reporters. So, so that's really, I think there's a value to that. There's a lot of online opportunities to learn new stuff. I mean, you can go out and find them, but there's, online CEU opportunities, or just, even if you're not in that position, that you need CEUs, just go and take the seminars anyway and learn stuff. There's no rule against that, and I remember doing that. I went to seminars before I got my RPR, because again, I guess maybe it was just who I was taught by, and who raised me, to go out there and search for knowledge, and keep things, fresh. But I noticed some questions here. One question was about warm-ups. I'll be honest with you, I'm probably a bad reporter. I usually don't warm up. I usually just kind of just go for it. And, I'm sure it's bad advice. As a student,
maybe you don't warm up, but you are always writing and practicing,
right,
et cetera, right? So,
absolutely. I mean, every day I'm always on the machine for at least, an hour. So my skills, are always kind of, in tune. The only time I really felt anything was when I just got off of vacation. I was on vacation for 2 weeks. And so my first day back, I'm on a trial, and my fingers were kind of like, whoa, what's this? But I got back into the swing of things and no problem. As far as the national convention, Sandra, they're always in the summertime, always like late July, early August time period. And they're fun to go to. I think next year they're in Orlando, Florida. So if you're in the area, or if you want to plan a trip, I was thinking about going there because I have family in Florida. I could always go visit. As far as the warm-up exercises, I'll send them to Laura to distribute to you guys. But there was a reporter years ago named Sanford Heller who came up with this booklet of exercises called the stenotype finger technique. I used them all through school, all through like when I was really like heavy into practicing and stuff like that. Really good. And I'll make sure I email them to her to distribute to the group because they're great. So anyway, El Chapo gets convicted, and we had a 3-defendant stock fraud case, which that was challenging. Although, stock fraud, that's thankfully all English versus the sometimes Spanish we had to take down, which got challenging because there's just certain words in Spanish that don't translate well into English, and you kind of lose like the flavor of what's being said. So, 3-defendant stock fraud case. We had 2017. We had Martin Shkreli, the farmer bro. Interesting to an extent. It was more just the circus surrounding that guy because he liked talking to the press after every trial day. So it really made for good newspaper reading. He was a quiet guy. He wasn't, and believe me, he wasn't like threatening at all. You know, it was just like, that's the guy, you know. We had another case, FIFA, which is the International Soccer Federation, and that was a bribery scandal. So there was, again, 3 defendants, challenging because, you know, again, you talk about South America, you know, I remember at one point there was a witness talking about a company, and he kept saying, food play. And I'm like, what? You know, like what are you saying? And I wasn't, you know, it was kind of like sometimes the way court runs, you don't always get to be on every case that comes through the courthouse. So it was like new terminology to me. I'm like, what is this guy saying? And at first I thought he was saying football, you know, like the Spanish pronunciation of football. Then the prosecutor says, oh, well, when you worked for Full Play, so there was a company called Full Play. They were like a sports promotion company in Argentina that was getting bribed or giving bribes out to the FIFA guys to get, you know, in on the different soccer matches to make money and whatnot.
I want to just comment something right there, just for anybody, the students who are listening. When something like that happens, we just write it phonetically, whatever you can get down, and then you figure it out later.
Exactly. You know, I was a little worried because everyone was getting real time, but you know, again, real time's a rough draft, and as long as you let the parties know, like, hey, it's a rough draft, you'll get a final complete transcript at the end of the day, then everybody's kind of cool.
Let's just answer a couple of these questions because we're nearing the end of our time. And there are a couple good ones about reading back. How frequently are you asked to read back in court is number 1. And then there's a question about how practicing differs as a reporter and as a student, and any practicing tips you might have.
Okay, so I'll answer the first one first. Thankfully, with real time, there's not a whole lot of reading back now because the judges, they just look up at their screen and they make a ruling. They don't really need to ask us to read back unless maybe we got like a little, you know, messed up.
You have to translate the steno to English.
Right, exactly. Although we have one judge here, Judge Kogan, he actually can read steno because he was a litigator for years at a big firm in New York, and he can read right through the stuff. So he's pretty adept at reading steno. You know, then you get the judges that don't have real time, but we do because we always bring our laptops to court. We just read back from our screens. It's pretty quick. And as far as like jury trials, the rule, well, not the rule, but the procedure here in my court, we actually send the redacted transcripts into the jury when they want different witnesses. So we just redact out all like the objections and colloquy and stuff like that, and they just get the testimony. And so they just read it themselves. We don't even read back anymore. Other courts are different. Again, you know, procedures vary from court to court. And as far as practicing as a reporter, working versus a student, you know what? The practicing becomes very focused. You know, what's the goal? Is it passing a civil service exam? Is it passing a leg of the merit or the RPR? Then you know what? I'm focusing all my energy on that. Versus when you're a student, you know, you've got tests to pass for each speed level, you know, lit, jury, Q&A. Well, then you got to kind of divide your into those 3 areas, you know, or like I know when I was in school and say one speed had 1 lit, 1 jury, 1 Q&A, you know, if I was done with my literary and my jury charge, all I have was my Q&A left in that class, I would just focus all my attention on Q&A, you know, and my formula always was like maybe 10 minutes of finger drills, whether it was the Sanford Heller exercises or like transition practice, which was I would just take like a book or a magazine or a newspaper and just kind of write from that. We call it book practice, but people sometimes call it transition practice. Then the bulk of the practice hour or 2, whatever, was always, you know, speed. So I would try to do like, you know, if I was going for my 225, I would practice, I would start at 200. Then go to 225, then maybe go to 230, 240, come back down to 225, back down to 200 for clean notes, back up. And that's how I would kind of do it. I practiced in my parents' basement, and I had like a table and all my practice tapes. That's how old I am. I use tapes. I always laugh about that. And I would just have it all lined up. And that day, if I had 2 hours, I would have, whatever material I needed lined up right in front of me, and I would just pop in one cassette after another. Or I would I wrote a tape recorder class. So I would tape record the class dictation and use that as practice material. So again, if you're a student, depending on where you are in life, like I was a high school graduate and I just had no other responsibilities, I could devote 2 hours to practicing, when I got home from school. Again, I give people credit who are doing court reporting and a full-time job, and you really got to be focused on what you're doing. And if you have a family on top of that, you got to manage that stuff too. I got a taste of that when I was going for different tests later on when I had kids, and, it becomes a juggling act. But, I would get into work early then. If 8:30 was the start time, I was in the office at 7:30, and I'd practice for an hour before I had to get my day going. And so that's how it varies.
Great.
All right.
That's great stuff. I really, really, really appreciate that you came on here and told us about all of this. So we've had different speakers, and this has been great. You gave a lot of insight into, for example, court and how to get ready, how you've gotten your career been better honed in by taking tests, and a lot of great information. So I really, really appreciate it. If you do send me those finger drills or finger exercises, I will share them with everybody. And
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. And I know everybody, there was all the people on the call actually stayed through the whole thing. So everybody was just as fascinated as I was. So thank you so much again. And we look forward to seeing what else you're going to do and what else you're going to say in the future.
Thanks a lot, Laura.
Great. All right. Well, everybody. Oh, go ahead.
No, I have an article in the September issue of the JCR. It just got published about some of the things I do in the outside world. So
nice.
Check that out.
Yeah, we will look for that. We will definitely look for that. The JCR. The JCR is the National Court Reporter Association magazine. It puts out every month. So we will definitely look for that. All right, everybody. Thank you again, everybody who came, for taking time out of your day to come and hear Anthony speak. And I will see you all soon in the next video.
Great. See you, Laura.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.